Welcome, everyone. Hi. Thanks for coming to our last lecture and meeting of the class today. Um, just trying to figure out what to do today. So we wanted to do something fun and a little bit lighter than we've been doing so far in the rest of this class. And so what I thought I would do is tell you a little bit about security in phones. And I use an iPhone, so I'm going to tell you about some of the security protections in iPhones. Not because iPhones are particularly special, just it was relevant to me, and I was curious, and I went to learn more about it, and so I thought I would share with you what I found. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about different aspects of some security features that are present in the iPhone. It's kind of a nice example of some of the most advanced security techniques. And I'm not going to test you on any of this on the final exam. This is just a chance to see how some of the topics that we've been studying in this class show up in like a real product in our everyday life. And stop me at any point if you want. Glad to have this be a kind of a discussion. So I've got material prepared, but I'm glad to go off on a tangent if you all are more interested in something else. So I thought I would start with a little bit of history about cryptography. I don't know why, I just find this fun. So I want to share it with you. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of background about history of cryptography, particularly in telephony and communication systems, to give you a little bit of backdrop for like some of the security challenges that are relevant for phones and phone communication. And how many people have kind of heard some of the story of the Enigma machine? I talked a little bit about it in World War II. Okay. It's super fascinating. One of the things that I find fascinating is that the Germans who used this Enigma machine, super sophisticated at the time, machine for encoding communications, especially with German U-boats, would believed to be like in practice probably more or less unbreakable by the Germans when they deployed it. And then turned out the Allies, and especially led by the British, went and broke it anyway. But they were routinely reading encrypted communications sent using the Enigma. And you can learn lots more about that story if you're interested. I highly recommend this movie called The Imitation Game, which is like a semi-pseudo-factual, semi-halfway history of the life of Alan Turing, which mentions some of the history there. It's kind of fascinating. There's like these Polish mathematicians who kind of before the start of World War II were studying it. They managed to like steal a copy of the machine, reverse engineer how it worked, found some mathematical weaknesses, like studied group theory, and found some ways to, in principle, start to decrypt some of the messages, but it was too slow. The Germans would change their codes all the time, and they couldn't quite keep up, and it wasn't quite useful enough. And then Poland got invaded and overrun. And the Polish mathematicians realized, oh my gosh, we got to get word about this like information we have to others. And they ended up, this mathematician ended up kind of sneaking all the way from Poland, occupied Poland after the invasion, to like France and eventually to Britain, where he hooked up with a bunch of British effort to try to break German codes, and connected with Alan Turing, who is like considered these days one of the fathers of computer science, figured out a way to automate some of those attacks and make it practical, and so that it was feasible for the British to start reading the German code. Sometimes people consider that automated machine to be one of the earliest like precursors of the modern day computer. And Alan Turing invented a bunch of theory that today we understand as like theory behind computing. It's kind of a sad story where like he didn't live long enough to see computing become widespread and see the impact of his work in computing. His big impact in breaking German codes, which some people say maybe shortened the war in Germany by a year or two, was kept super secret after the war. And one of the things I found fascinating was after the war, the British covered up everything about this story about how they broke these codes. Obviously, they had to keep it secret during the war, so the British didn't change their codes. But after the war, they like ultra classified this. They like burned some of the machines. They like swore people to secrecy. Why? Because they started selling the Enigma machine to their allies as unbreakable cryptography that they knew they could read if they needed to. Kind of a friend, but they could stab them in the back. So, and this did not become known until like the 80s or something like that. So they managed to keep this secret for decades. So, and kind of after World War II, this is like cryptography, the domain of the military. And then in the 70s, cryptography started to be studied by academics in the open world. One of the interesting developments was in the 1980s, we had cell phones, analog cell phones. The earliest cell phones were all analog, which meant they were a radio that were transmitting like your, I don't know, FM radio or something like that. And they were super easy to eavesdrop on. Anyone with a radio scanner could eavesdrop on analog calls, and some, famous people had their calls eavesdropped on, and they started to become widespread. And like the cell phone companies were like, oh man, we got to do something about this. And in the late 80s, they started designing a standard for digital cell phone communications, sometimes now called 2G. One of those was a GSM standard, and the telcos knew they needed to do something about this eavesdropping problem, so they decided they were going to use cryptography. They were going to encrypt the phone calls so that when it's transmitted over the radio waves, that it's transmitted to the base station in encrypted form. And they had this secret standards body that like devised the encryption algorithm. And then when they released the GSM standard, they said, look, with digital cellular telephony, now everything's encrypted. You don't have to worry about eavesdropping anymore. But the standard was secret. The algorithms were secret. Nothing was publicly known. And after a few years, some rumors started to spread that like maybe something was not right with this. And it took a decade, but in 1999, the algorithm leaked to the public. I don't really know how it happened. I know that I was a grad student at the time, and I went to a cryptography conference with another PhD student who I worked together with. And we went to this conference together. It was super fun. And this privacy advocate came to us and said, Merry Christmas, and dumped this document on us. And this document was the encryption algorithm that was used in GSM to cell phones to encrypt calls. I don't know where he got this from. I've heard him say that he reverse engineered it, but there's also a part of me that wonders if maybe he actually had like an insider inside inside who was like whistleblower who was like revealing this information to him. But it was the first time that it was known what the algorithm was.
If you put into the communication, you would only be able to get the encrypted message, but
yes.
You needed an encrypted algorithm to
right.
That. So
yes.
Does this really?
Do you want to say anything more?
I don't know. I feel like would you be able to get from an encryption algorithm?
No, you need the key.
Yeah.
The encryption algorithm alone should not pose any risk to the security of the system if it's well designed. So that was something that everybody was kind of curious about. Was it well designed? And what we discovered, this other student, Ian, and I, we like disappeared from the conference. We like, oh my gosh, I got to look at this thing. We like disappeared, and 5 hours later, we had discovered that it was not well designed. Well, there were two algorithms. One that was allowed for use in a few countries, and the rest of the world was given to the rest of the world. And that exportable one for the rest of the world was not well designed. In fact, it was totally massively breakable. It was highly insecure, and it had some design features that looked like there'd been deliberately a backdoor put in there to make it vulnerable. And we later learned that there was some argument that happened inside that standards committee where the telcos are like, we got to solve this eavesdropping problem. Let's use encryption. And then signals intelligence agencies at the major countries said, whoa, hold it right there, buddy. No way. We're not allowing you to do that because that could be used by like terrorists and criminals and other, foreign military. And we need the ability to like listen in on cell phone conversations. And if you put encryption in there, we're blocking your ability to export your any cell phones you make. You won't be able to like sell them outside your country. And the company's like, oh my gosh, we're global companies. We have to be able to sell them to the world or else we're going to go out of business. And so they came to a compromise. The compromise was the signal intelligence agencies gave them an algorithm and said, here's an algorithm we're willing to let you use. No one spoke about this. No one was allowed to talk about it. But the algorithm actually came from, I think it was the British GCHQ. And what became clear a decade later, after like we got to look at the algorithm in the open world, was that that algorithm had been deliberately designed to be weakened, so that the people who knew the algorithm could listen in on phone calls. So, we thought we had solved this problem, but we hadn't fully solved it. Yeah. How did we figure it out? Well, Ian and I we got this privacy activist came to talk to us because like we knew we'd done some work on like analyzing encryption algorithms and um, uh, the crucial thing, it wasn't anything very fancy. It was like standard techniques that were known that the academics had been studying how to make secure algorithms, and they tried to make some, and then some other academics had said, "Oh, that's actually not secure. Here's an attack algorithm with this mathematical flaw." And there were all these techniques that were known for analyzing these things, and we just took the things that were known, and we discovered that the algorithm had been very, very cleverly designed to be vulnerable to one of those. You could like solve a system of linear equations over GF2 to recover the key material or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. No, I would say there was some like, upset among the super in the know privacy activists and techie geeky types, but broadly not too much. Yeah, yeah. But embarrassment. I mean, it's embarrassing for the telcos, right? Because they had to admit, yeah, all this time actually if you're not in one of the handful of countries, I don't know, Germany, France, US, Britain, you were actually getting really weak cryptography and you thought you were secure, but you weren't.
The rest of the world.
No, the few countries had good crypto and the rest of the world had bad crypto. And apparently, like there were fights among these, intelligence agencies. Like Germany's like, oh my gosh, Soviet Union right on the border with them. We're the first ones who are going to get overrun if there's a war. We want strong cryptography, and others were like, no, we need to be able to spy on people. We want weak cryptography, and so yeah, yeah. It was. They had medium strength cryptography that was probably good enough against like most people. If the intelligence agencies really had to, they could probably get in, but they'd have to work hard. Um, yeah, yeah, it was like specially designed to be like that. I mean, we'll never know because they're not talking, but just looking at the design, it seems pretty clear. You look at that element, it's like there's no reason you'd add that. That adds a weakness, and it like pretty clear. The more secure one had like was limited to like I don't know, 50 bits of key material or something. So it was like semi-breakable with brute force. Yeah. Yep. It was all the same. Oh yeah. Yeah. There were two algorithms. There was if you were in a handful of countries, you got the better algorithm, and the rest of the world got this bad algorithm that was like totally breakable. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we published a paper, and there were a whole bunch of academic papers after this algorithm became known, analyzing the system and pointing out this was not a good design. Um, but until we knew, yeah, yeah, yes, that's right. Yep.
So if that guy didn't like, essentially the algorithm.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so then in the 90s, there was this rapid growth in the internet. And all of a sudden, it became clear that we really needed cryptography to protect communications we're doing on the internet, like web browsing, buying online shopping, banking, stuff like that. And so companies started to deploy end-to-end cryptography. We started to have things like HTTPS, TLS. And that was a big change, and there started to be these political fights over encryption, because encryption made it hard for intelligence agencies and law enforcement to spy on communications if they needed to. So they were opposed, and the businesses were in favor, and legislators kind of tried to make a compromise. And one of the compromises they made was they made a requirement in the phone network that there has to be support for lawful intercept, meaning there has to be features in the phone infrastructure to enable wiretapping of phone calls. So in particular, no end-to-end encryption of phone calls. Has to be, you can encrypt the phone call while it's going over the airwaves for cellular call, but then when it reaches the base station, it has to be decrypted, has to be available in the clear to the cell phone company so that they can allow law enforcement to do a wiretap if they have a warrant or if they have a need or whatever. Okay. Little bit dangerous functionality to add to your your software. So for instance, in 2004, there was a scandal where these features were misused by someone. We think we have a good idea who. You can look it up if you're curious. It was a nation state, we think, illegally wiretapping something like 100 politicians in Greece, including the prime minister and members of the cabinet. And over the years, we've seen a number of compromises of governments hacking into communication infrastructure. They're very incentivized to do that. So in 2009, there was a really major event where in the US, 30 major companies, big, well-regarded tech companies, got hacked into. Google was one of the prominent ones. I mean, if Google can get hacked into, their reputation is among the most competent that anyone could be. And Lockheed Martin and defense companies and companies you think would be the most sophisticated and aware about security got hacked successfully. And how did that work? This attack worked by sending a targeted, personalized email, phishing email to an employee that looked legit, that had a link, looked relevant to their work. And when you clicked on the link, their web browser went to this web page, and it served up some HTML code that exploited a zero-day buffer overrun vulnerability in the use after free vulnerability in the Microsoft Internet Explorer web browser that silently compromised their machine. And then the shell code injected some malware that started browsing the source code repositories that employee had access to and downloading all the source code. And then the hackers downloaded source code from internal corporate systems. And then in some cases, they found vulnerabilities in that software by access to the source code, and then used that employee's machine as a jumping off point to attack other internal systems. And Google went very public with this and said, look, we discovered that Gmail accounts of political dissidents had been targeted in this attack. And some of them there might have been some partial access gain to them. And I think I can't really tell for sure, but I think part of one of the things that happened was that the attackers downloaded the internal Google code for authentication and found a flaw in it and exploited it. But I'm not 100% sure about that. So super sophisticated attack that was a wake-up call to everyone that countries were targeting these systems. Yeah. 0 day means it was not previously known vulnerability. No one knew about this vulnerability before. Use after free is we saw this in the memory safety. That's the C code frees some memory region, but then keeps a pointer to it and continues to access it after it's been freed. You're not supposed to do that. That's a bug in your code, and it's a bug that enables similar consequences of buffer overrun. So a memory safety flaw. Project One stuff, basically. They did a Project One exploit. And then in 2013, another big revelation was Snowden. How many people have heard about the Snowden revelations? Okay, if you're in crypto or security, oh my gosh, you know about this. It was a big deal. This was an NSA contractor who had access to system administrator on NSA. NSA is the US spy surveillance agency, had access as a system administrator to a lot of their systems and downloaded tens or hundreds of thousands of classified documents and went public with them. He said the NSA is spying on people and the public deserves to know, and the NSA is lying about it, and you need to know about the ways that they're kind of exceeding, going way beyond in mass surveillance. Didn't think it was healthy, and so revealed this information. And like all sorts of revelations, like that the NSA had metadata on 100 million like cell phone subscribers and had ability to access the email and search records and everything about anyone at all these major companies, Google and Facebook and Yahoo. They've been spying directly on the internal network communications inside the data centers of like major companies like Google. They had collected metadata on email and internet use of Americans, not just foreigners. They had like systems to do man-in-the-middle attacks on the web, and then like do a man-in-the-middle attack on your connection your web browser makes to a web server to replace it with malicious HTML, which then sent malware that exploited it as a vulnerability in your web browser, or that then like implanted malware in your machine. And they were the British version of was spying on webcam chats and collecting images from millions of people from their video chats. And the NSA had paid $10 million to a company that made crypto software to put a backdoor into their crypto library that people were using. And another NSA whistleblower that said 80% of all like phone calls are recorded and stored in the US. Like just super surprising revelations that made clear that, oh my gosh, and probably the NSA is not unique, probably other major intelligence agencies are spying on, trying to gain access to stuff we're doing on the internet.
They were in a contact with NSA.
Yeah.
Why? I don't think public good is the only goal.
Yeah. Why did he do it? Super controversial, right? Super controversial for him to reveal this. The reason that he said was the NSA is lying to the public and the public deserves to know. The NSA is saying we don't spy on Americans, and he's saying they do spy. And Snowden said, I have all this evidence, they are spying on Americans, and that is like ripe for abuse and just waiting for could be used for, totalitarian, crushing dissidents in the US and so on. So Snowden said, this is a major risk you deserve to know. The NSA's position was, we collect all this data. We're allowed to collect it by law. We don't look at it. For foreigners, we look at it, but for Americans, we don't look at it unless we have a good reason. Yeah. So, but one effect of that was the rest of the world lost a lot of trust in American companies because some of them had partnerships with the NSA to allow the NSA to gain access, and some of them the NSA had just penetrated and had full access. And so, America was kind of one of the leaders in tech, and we had a lot of the leading tech companies were primarily American. And when other countries saw how American spy agency was using that to spy on communications of politicians in other countries and spy on other people around the rest of the world, they said, oh my gosh, we can't trust our data to these American companies. American companies are in bed with, or at least not able to protect themselves against this kind of spying. So that created a lot of pressure on internet companies to secure their systems against nation state attacks. Some of them because they were worried about the US spying, some of them because they're worried about other countries. You pick which country you're worried about spying on their communications. So that was a major development that led to internet companies to start to think about, I have to think not just about like some random cyber criminals trying to make some money, but also about government actors trying to hack into our systems. And there's this slide deck from an NSA. I mean, the thing about this is incredible is just like how boring a lot of the stuff is. This is like from a NSA, classified presentation where they had a slide on how they were able to gain access to um, data of Google users like emails and Gmail and so on. And they're showing here the network topology that has a connection between the user and their front end, where the SSL ends at the front end, and then there's internal fiber optic links between the front end and their data centers, and is not over SSL in that portion, is in the clear. So you see this SSL added and removed here. And the point is NSA figured out if they spied on those fiber optic links between their data centers, they could see all the data in the clear. So they were spying on the internal Google communications. And NSA employees were super pissed, right? Super pissed because now all the rest of the world was like, what the heck, Google? What are you doing allowing this to happen? What's that? And then last year, you may have seen news stories about, again in telephony, nation-state attacks on US phone companies, where a bunch of the major US phone companies, the brands you've heard of, been hacked by some government for over a year, that was accessing both like text messages and metadata from over 1 million people in the US, mostly those in the Washington, D.C. area, a lot of targeting of people working for government and military. News articles said it included a phone that Trump had used, phone that Vance used, phones used by Kamala Harris staff. And it kind of the same kind of vulnerabilities we've seen in this class. Vulnerabilities in ISP software, like unsanitized file upload to some web management console thing, then hacked some like telephony company administrative interface, and then hacked the routers, and then hacked into the lawful intercept systems. So governments are interested in gaining access to communications. You can probably hypothesize some reasons why they might care. Like, be really useful to be able to know if you're in a trade negotiation what the other side's internal deliberations are. Yeah. Uh, I mean, I'm sure at least some do. But as we've seen, there's also some business that's done over ordinary phones. Yeah. So I guess maybe the reason I'm showing you all this is like one takeaway is that defending against nation state attackers is super hard. And they're, in some sense, they're kind of an early warning of attacks that might come like a decade later. That the nation states are the innovators using the most sophisticated attacks that then, 5 years later, kind of the ordinary criminals trickle down, everyone's using. And one takeaway was that we can't trust the companies or the service providers or the telcos because they can be hacked. Or at least many people around the world lost trust in these companies and said, I can't rely on them to stay safe. We need security that works even if the company gets hacked, because they're going to be a target. So that's a whole bunch of backdrop into then some of the security mechanisms I wanted to show you. Now onto the real topic. Thanks for being patient through that like history lesson. Some parts of the iPhone security that I think are interesting I want to tell you about are like how data is encrypted, backups, text messages, apps, jailbreaks, and private cloud compute. So maybe interesting to look at data storage on your phone, because we've got lots of personal data on the phone that like is super private and I would not want exposed to the world. On the iPhone and many phones, the data on your phone is encrypted. Why? One reason is if my phone is lost or stolen, I don't want whoever gets their hands on my phone to be able to get a copy of all my data, like a copy of all my emails or those private pictures I took or those unfortunate Snapchat messages I sent or whatever. Um, and the other reason is, this is closely related. If you encrypt all the data on the phone, provides a very easy way to erase the phone. My phone has like 32 gigabytes of storage on it. If we wanted to erase all the data, like let's say that as I lost my phone and I want to hit the button to erase the phone, it takes a while to like overwrite all that data. But if the data is encrypted, there's a much simpler way to erase my phone. Can you guess how to erase? Yeah? Oh, I put it on the slide. Oh, okay. You can guess. You erase the key. And then you don't have to erase all the data. You just erase the decryption key, which is a very small value. And now it's inaccessible. All right. So we want to encrypt all the data stored on our phone. But so then we have to figure out how to do that. So let's like think through how you might do that if you were a designer of a phone. Like what key would you use to encrypt the data on the phone? And where would you like get that key from? Where would you store it? Do I like generate a random key and store it on the device? Do I use the passcode or the PIN as the key? Do I do something else? Any thoughts about, I guess here's at least two candidates. I could generate a random key and encrypt everything with that key and store that key on my device, or I could use the PIN, the passcode, as the key. Is there any thoughts on the trade-offs of those, pluses or minuses of those? Yeah?
So that seems right.
Yeah, the passcode is like maybe it's 6 digits. So what is that? A million possibilities. Super ripe for brute force attack, where someone who's got access to my phone could try decrypting under a million possible keys and see which one seems to lead to plausible looking output. So encrypting with my passcode seems not so secure.
If you have it stored in some way on the phone, it can be like the key can be like obtained through like I guess like I don't know some process.
Yeah, if I've got encrypted all the data stored on my phone, but then I stored the key right there, what's the point? Someone who's got access to my phone and can read the storage could read the key and then decrypt with that key. So storing the decryption key alongside my data, that doesn't seem like a good idea. So I had two ideas here that both seem like they suck.
Like store keep rather themselves. Like we have biometrics on our phones right now, so like maybe there could be a function to translate the biometrics into a string.
Uh-huh. That's an interesting idea. Translate the like my thumbprint or my face picture into unique string of numbers. Yeah, there are schemes to do that. It's a little tricky to do because if you take two pictures of my face, they're similar, but they're not identical. So you need a way to convert those to numbers so you'll get exactly the same numbers every time because the decryption will need the key has to be exactly right. It can't be even one bit off. There are ways to do that, but it's kind of tricky and not fully like 100% reliable. And like, it's a little scary to do that for storing my data because if I am off and I can't decrypt, I can't get access to my data. But you could definitely do that. You could definitely do that. The iPhone, I don't know of any phone that currently does that. Maybe fingerprints also. And fingerprints have a similar characteristic where they're not identical if you take them multiple times. Yep. That's a technically feasible thing, not something that any phone currently does, but I think it would be feasible to do that. Yeah.
Right, we already talked about slow hashes. And obviously there's the risk though, if we only have a million possibilities, they could pick them. But we could avoid this with like some salt, like the manufacturer, which is unique for every owner.
Oh yeah, you already had to solve this problem on project 2. Don't use the passcode as the key. Use a slow hash of the passcode as the key. Like maybe with a salt. And that way, even though there's only a million possible passcodes, it would take a while to generate all possible slow hashes. Maybe it takes a second or something for each slow hash, so it would take like a million seconds to generate all possible slow hashes, which is, what is that? A week? What's that? 300 hours? Okay, so 2 weeks maybe. Yeah, okay, so that's much better. I like that a lot better. That's a lot more secure. That's a plausible defense. Yeah.
Yeah. It's something that manufacturers here, I remember, look that up for phone. Use salt. Attack has physical access to your phone. They can read that salt and pass.
Yeah, so salts usually are stored in the clear with the data. You assume the attacker can read it. The salt doesn't need to be secret from the attacker. It's just that each phone has a different salt. So that if I spend 2 weeks trying to do all possible slow hashes of all possible hash codes to attack your phone, I can't reuse that computation to attack someone else's phone. That's the only thing that a salt does for you. Okay, good solution. Good solution. That would provide a lot better security. They would mean that someone who's stolen my phone, if they did maybe 2 weeks of computation, could get access to my data, but it wouldn't be trivial. It wouldn't be super easy. But it's still maybe not as secure as I might ideally like. So the iPhone has something that goes even further, gets even better. It's a hard problem. It's hard. It's hard to like get good security in this setting. So the iPhone has a clever solution. Their solution is that Apple controls the hardware. So they put an extra coprocessor on the phone that's used only for security, very limited purpose, this secure hardware coprocessor. And in that coprocessor, it has hard-coded a unique device key. Each phone has a different key. That key never leaves the coprocessor. In fact, the only thing the coprocessor can do is do like an AES encryption or decryption with that key. And then what the coprocessor does when you enter your PIN into the phone, it does a slow hash of the device key and the PIN to get a file system decryption key. Okay. And the files, the data stored on your phone is encrypted under K. So when you start up your phone and you enter in your PIN, it can compute K for encrypting and decrypting data. And then you update your phone, you turn your phone off, you turn it back on again. You can get that same key back again because it's a function of the passcode and the unique device key. But someone who steals your phone and doesn't know the passcode won't be able to figure out K because A, they won't know the device key, so they can't even compute the slow hash. They could try guessing what the passcode is and ask this coprocessor to tell them what the corresponding K would be, but they'd have to make a million guesses at what the passcode is. And this slow hash will slow them down. And moreover, this coprocessor actually has some built-in rate limits where it will only compute these a couple of times per minute or something like that, and slows down this process. And so actually an attacker who wanted, even if they gained access to your phone and they started trying guesses at the passcode and sending it to the secure code processor and asking for the K that you get based on that guess at the passcode, it would take a really long time to try all possible passcodes. So this way, they're using the secure hardware coprocessor, they're able to get really strong security, even though your passcode doesn't have a whole lot of secret bits in it. It's fairly guessable.
Device secure, like, why is it that the attacker can't get access to the device?
Yeah, so an attacker who has physical control of your phone with expensive enough equipment probably could get the device key, but it's super expensive equipment. They need like scanning, tunneling, microscope, and it's not clear if even that is enough because it's down there in the gates, in the circuitry, which is, at like, 10 nanometers size or something like that. So it's not that easy to like reverse engineer what's happening inside this hardware circuit and the bits that are hard coded in there. It's stored in this secure hardware coprocessor, and this is hardware coprocessors designed in hardware to have this constant value that can be used only for like AES encryption and decryption. There is no instruction that can like copy the device key into a register or into memory and the AES is done in hardware too. There's also a circuit for that. So like it's like hardware that is designed to keep that key secret. Yeah. Aha! Yeah, the way that I've described it here, your phone would have to re-encrypt all the data on your phone. How could we fix it so that that wouldn't be necessary? In fact, it's not necessary. They've got a solution so they don't have to re-encrypt all the data on your phone. How could you modify this design? Yeah, maybe something like that could work, but there's a more direct way. Yeah, use a separate key. And then you may have heard this. Every problem in computer science can be solved with another level of indirection. So every problem in cryptography can be solved with another key. So we have uh, we don't actually encrypt the data with the key K. We have another key, K2, that's used to encrypt the data, and we store K2 encrypted under K. No, K and K2 are not hard-coded. They're like derived on boot up. They're never stored anywhere persistently. The device key is fixed and is necessary. So if you wanted to change your passcode, that would change K. The data store is encrypted under K2. So you don't change K2. You just encrypt K2 under the new K. It's random. So it's not derived deterministically. It is encrypted under K and stored somewhere. So K unlocks the actual file system decryption key. Yeah. It's not hard coded. It's like kept in memory, but when you turn the phone off, it disappears. It's never stored persistently anywhere. It's never stored on flash. You can't. But when the phone boots up the next time, it's rederived. This derivation is a deterministic function. So you derive it again, be the same input, so you'll get the same K. No, you don't. Okay. Sorry, I'm doing a lousy job of explaining. So when I encrypt my data like when I first set up my phone, I enter in the passcode. The hardware coprocessor uses the passcode to figure out K. Data that I store is encrypted with K. And then I turn my phone off, K disappears. I turn my phone back on. My phone can't access the data because it doesn't have K. I type my passcode in. The coprocessor derives K again. Now my phone has K again and can decrypt the stored data and can write new data encrypted under K. So K is never stored anywhere. It's rederived when it's needed from the passcode. And then the K2 business is like yeah, we don't actually use K to encrypt the data. We have a separate key, K2, that encrypts the data, and we store what we store on flash is an encryption of K2 under the key K. So K unlocks the real key. Sorry, that was complicated. Yeah.
If Apple be they necessarily they all right? Well, they're probably going to need to make them in some sort of standardized procedural way. And doesn't that risk someone probably with a lot of cost being able to like obtain the data from like this hardware alignment kind like based on the hardware configuration being able to provide what a key is for any given type of in some sort of like procedural way. They can't really custom build every single process.
I have no idea. I don't know how they actually do that. How do they make sure that no one can extract this key, device key from the hardware processor? I don't know. I don't know. I would speculate that they've got some kind of like flash storage or some kind of storage on there that gets like when it's manufactured, a random device key gets picked and gets burned into that storage. And that the hardware coprocessor is designed so that it just doesn't have the capability to like copy that device key somewhere else. So it's stored in there, but there's no way to get it out. But I don't know. That's just my speculation about how it might work. I think it's some kind of special memory that's like right on the same chip with that hardware coprocessor. I think there's a way to do that, to like have a little bit of persistent memory that you write to once. I don't know how it works. I think there's something that's like some piece of the circuit that gets like burned out or not burned out once. I don't know how it works. We'd have to look it up. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm not a hardware person. All right, so that's encrypting data on your phone, which provides really quite strong level of security in case you like lose your phone or someone steals your phone from you. One of the weak spots in data encryption on your phone, the data that's stored on your phone is encrypted really quite securely. Right now, one of the weak spots, one of the easiest ways to gain access to the data on your phone is not by gaining access to your phone, but through backups. So let me tell you about how backups are protected, because they're kind of a weak link right now. If I lose my phone, or I drop it in the ocean, or it's stolen from me, I want to be able to like go to the Apple store and like buy a new phone and like get all my data, restore my data onto the new phone, right? So I really need a way to back up the data. Like it sucks to lose all your data and all your photos forever. So how does Apple and all the, Android and everybody, how do they do that? They have a cloud backup service, a way to make a backup of all your data onto the cloud. Well, if we back up a copy of all the data to the cloud, then that cloud copy of the data becomes really, really critical. Anyone who gains access to the copy on the cloud now has all my data. So what are we going to do about that? Any thoughts? How could I protect backups? Yeah. So when I back up my phone, all my data gets copied onto an Apple server somewhere. I would like it to be so if someone successfully hacks that Apple server, they can't get my data. Any thoughts on how I could try to achieve that? Some kind of hybrid encryption. Do you want to say more about what you're thinking? I have an asymmetric key. How do I use the key? Okay, so I'm guessing that you're thinking that we should encrypt the backup. So the data that's stored on the cloud server is encrypted? Yeah? Is that what you're thinking? You're thinking maybe encrypted under the public key? Okay, let's run with that. We don't even need public key cryptography. Let's say that it's encrypted under a key. Before I store a copy of my data on the Apple server and encrypt it under a key, what do I do with that key? How do I make sure that I can restore later if I need to? What key do I use, or what do I do with that key? Yeah? Oh, sorry, a little louder. I'm sorry, my hearing is so bad. Hmm? Oh, yeah, on Apple phones you have an Apple ID, which means like a login on Apple's servers. Um, so you're right, that is what Apple does currently. Apple has basically, to gain access to the data, you like basically log into their server, like log into their website. And if you log in with the right username and password, then you can download your backup, roughly speaking. With that design, if someone hacks into the Apple server successfully, can they access my backup? Yeah? If it's encrypted with the password of my Apple ID, yeah, then they could not gain access because they don't know my Apple ID password. Good, I like that design. Great, okay, good design. That'd be a great way to do it. Excellent. It turns out Apple doesn't do it that way, quite. And I wanted to tell you why, but I feel like we've been going a long time. Do you feel like we should take a break? How many would like to take a break now? How many want to keep going? Break. We desperately need a break. Let's take a break. Thank you. I appreciate you. If there's food, if you want it, come take a break. Stretch your legs. All right, backups. Um, I left you on a tiny itty bitty cliffhanger. Was like, why don't Apple do this good idea that you had, which is encrypt backups under your Apple ID password? Uh, that would be better security than what they do now. Um, why don't they do it? Does anyone have a guess why they don't do that? Yeah? If you forget your password, that's going to be painful. Yeah, I think maybe. I don't know why. That sounds like a plausible guess to me. Yeah? Oh, interesting. Family accounts.
Like, like parents put back to some other kind of data.
Oh, interesting. 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 So when you look at backups, it's not just Apple. There's Android. There's browsers that have cloud sync and cloud backup of your data. And one of the things you notice is that it's really challenging to figure out how to do secure backup, because what you really want to do is you want to encrypt the backup and then have the key stored somewhere safe, like on my phone. But oh wait, if I lose my phone, I'm not going to have the key. So oh crap, that doesn't actually work. So what do I use to encrypt under? And then your next thought is maybe I should encrypt with the user's password. Encrypt the backup with the user's password. And then the thing that turns out to be in practice a major blocker for that is people forget their passwords. And it really sucks if your backup mechanism can't be accessed if you can't remember your password. So you end up with these like semi-requirements or nice to haves. Like from a usability, if my phone is lost or stolen, I want to be able to restore. And also, if I forget my device passcode, it'd really be nice if there was still a way to get access to my data. But then you have these security requirements that it would be really nice if Apple doesn't have any way to get access to my data. Apple employees can't access my data. If Apple servers get hacked, the hackers can't access my data. If some random country demands a copy of my data from Apple that Apple doesn't have a way to comply, it'd be really nice that my data is like, I don't know, encrypted or something so that the cloud servers can't access my data. And then even more, like, just to make this problem even harder, is that people's passcodes or passwords are often semi-guessable. Like your passcode's 6 digits, so it's not a very good encryption key because someone could just try all a million possibilities. So these combination of like requirements make this problem so hard, like almost impossible to solve. And like nobody has a really good solution. Everybody who is dealing any kind of backups struggles with dealing with all of these different conflicting requirements. And the most common solution out there, as far as I can tell, is you ditch the third requirement. The backup is stored on the cloud servers in the clear, and then you use some access control rules that the cloud server enforces who can access it. And if the cloud server gets hacked, oh, well, your data is compromised. What I find interesting about Apple is that Apple actually has an intriguing solution to this seemingly contradictory set of requirements. It seems almost impossible to satisfy all of these. But the interesting thing about almost impossible is it's not the same as totally impossible. Does anyone remember that like there's a difference between mostly dead and all dead? One of my favorite movies of all time. Do you know what movie that is? Princess Bride. Yay. Um, um, they have a scheme called advanced data protection that's off by default. It's opt-in. You have to like turn it on because it has some usability compromises, but that I found really intriguing, like way of trying to deal with all these challenges. What they do is they encrypt the backup under a key, a random key that's not known to Apple, and they store the encrypted backup on Apple's cloud servers. So Apple can't access your backup. Hackers who hack into their servers won't be able to access the backup. So even if they get hacked, they can say, they couldn't have got access to your data because Apple doesn't have this key. But this key is going to be needed to do a restore. So there has to be some way when you want to restore your own data that you can get access to this key. And so then Apple does up to 3 things with this key to provide up to 3 ways to get the key back again when you need it. One is they save an encryption of the key under a slow hash of your passcode and like store that somewhere. And if you log into your Apple ID, you can get that encrypted version of K. And if you remember your passcode and you can log into your Apple ID, then you get this encrypted version of K. Using the passcode, you can do the slow hash and decrypt it and recover K. So that's one approach. If you still remember your passcode and your Apple ID, you can get back the key and you can get access to your data. If you've forgotten your passcode, another way is when you set up backups, they'll give you this random recovery code. You can think of it as another key. And you have to write that down. So this is the trade-off part. You write this down somewhere safe, the recovery code. And Apple stores an encryption of K. They encrypt K with that recovery code, and they store that somewhere. So if you need to restore, you can go look in your files for the recovery code, which hopefully you wrote down. You get that ciphertext from Apple, decrypt that ciphertext with the recovery code and recover K, and then you can get access to your data. That's the second way. If you wrote down the recovery code and you saved it and you still have access. And the third way, if both of those fail, you don't remember your passcode, you can't find your recovery code. The third way is when you set up the backup, you can designate a family member or contact who you trust as your recovery contact. And when you do that, they get given a random code, and the key K is encrypted under that random code. And so when you want to get access to your backup again, you can get back the encryption of K under that random code. Apple stores the encryption of K under that random code. They'll give that to you. And then you can go ask the contact, the family member, for the random code. And they can give you the random code needed to recover K. So the family member can't access K because they only have the recovery code, but not the encryption of K under the recovery code. Apple can't access K because they have this encryption, but they don't have the recovery code needed to decrypt it. But you, if you get both of those, one from your contact and one from Apple, you can recover K and then you can decrypt all your backup and restore. So I find it really interesting. It's a way that Apple ends up with, they don't have the keys, they can't decrypt. So they can then guarantee your safety, even if their servers get hacked, which as we see happens sometimes. And they can also like promise to you that even if some random government you've never heard of is trying to gain access to your data, that they will not be able to comply. So you don't have to worry about that. But that you can still like restore your data if you really need it. Yeah. The default is basically, it's not quite true, but it's almost true. The data, the backup data is stored in the clear on Apple servers, and Apple servers won't give it to you unless you log in with your Apple ID. The consequence of that is that if some hacker hacks into the Apple servers successfully, hopefully they won't be able to, but if they do, then they get access to people's backups. And if law enforcement comes to them from any country in the world and demands access to your data, they may have to comply. Which maybe you'd be okay with if it's like US law enforcement because we figure the rule of law, but like, what if it's some random country that they do business in? I don't know, Tunisia or something. I have nothing against Tunisia. Sorry. Maybe I shouldn't pick a concrete example that like, I don't know anything about them. And they now threaten Apple that like, we're going to ban sales of your devices if you don't allow law enforcement access. Do I want to trust every law enforcement agency everywhere in the world with the ability to access my data? I don't know. Maybe that's okay. Maybe it's not. So that's the kind of threat model that these systems are starting to be designed against. And I find it really interesting. This is basically like Project 2, except Apple has is doing a whole bunch more complexity there to deal with some of the usability requirements. In project 2, we just said, assume there's this key that is stored on the local client. You don't have to worry about the usability implications if it might get lost or forgotten. Yep.
Yes. They're still storing encryption. Well, hash. So if somebody knows that ASP is determining function, then and the hash of your passcode matches like a dictionary somewhere, potentially they still get access.
Yes. If someone hacks into the Apple servers and my passcode is guessable, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then they can gain access to my data. If they don't have access to the Apple servers, and they haven't hacked the Apple servers, they don't have any insider access, they would have to log into my Apple ID to be able to get the encrypted backup. So there's some partial protections. But yeah, if my passcode is guessable, then the security provided is weaker. Yeah, yeah. iMessage. I think also it's interesting to look at how iMessage, basically text messages, in Apple are encrypted end-to-end. Text messages, ordinary text messages are not encrypted end-to-end. Law doesn't allow them to be. This lawful intercept means they have to be sent in the clear. But Apple designed iMessage, and it doesn't route through the public telephony. It's an internet thing, messaging system. And it's encrypted end-to-end. So it's when I send an iMessage to someone else, my phone encrypts the iMessage using the public key of the recipient, and then the recipient's phone decrypts it. So the routers can't observe the text message. Apple can't see the text message. It's encrypted end-to-end.
If the communication, which was sent over iMessages, is say is indicated to crime scene or something, and we need to see those conversations.
Yeah, can law enforcement still gain access to these iMessages? Well, they're probably stored on the phone of the sender and the recipient. So if law enforcement can gain access to the sender or the recipient's phone, then they've got access. But if they don't have access, then no, basically, no, it's end-to-end encrypted, and they're out of luck. Apple has no ability to help them. The number one way that law enforcement gains access today, by the way, is through this backups loophole. Messages are encrypted, your local data is encrypted, but the backups are not encrypted unless you turn on ADP. So law enforcement goes to Apple with a warrant and says, give me a copy of the backup, the iCloud data. And then if the text messages are probably stored there on the cloud servers, there's probably a copy of them stored there, and so they may be able to gain access in that way. Yeah. 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 Sometimes the law is crazy. It's kind of, it doesn't make sense, basically. But what happened was, you could think of this as a political compromise, was the law placed restrictions on public telephony providers, the public switch telephone network, the AT&Ts and Verizons and so on of the world. But they didn't place this restriction on the internet. Your web browser can make a TLS connection to a web server. I don't know, you'd have to ask the politicians, but my guess would be that law enforcement was pushing, we really need access to the phones, and we've always had access to the phones. And so I think probably the legislatures were trying to preserve the status quo. that previously law enforcement had been able to tap the phone calls because there was no encryption. Whereas for the internet, there was no prior history and wanted to preserve the ability for innovation, or um, for whatever reason, that is the compromise we ended up with. Was the lawful intercept law only applies to like the public phone network, but not to all the rest of the communications we do. So not to, I don't know, WhatsApp or the message forum that you post on. Yeah, just how the law worked out. Yeah.
SMS messaging, probably subject to lawful intercept.
Yeah.
What is RCS also subject to lawful?
I believe that RCS and iMessage are like internet communications like WhatsApp and so on. But SMS is part of the public telephony and so required to support lawful intercept, I think. So I'm sure that like compromise made sense at the time, but now it seems kind of ridiculous that like text messages and iMessages should be subject to different laws. Here we are. Okay, so how does Apple do that? How does Apple ensure that you can encrypt these messages end to end? The crucial requirement is the key management. The tricky bit is the key management. Encrypt the message with the recipient's public key, but how do we figure out the recipient's public key? And the answer is same thing we did in Project 2. Apple runs a key server. Apple runs a key server that has a list of all of the everybody who has an Apple account and their public keys. So if I want to send a message to someone, an iMessage to someone, I look up their phone number or their email address, whatever the identifier for them is. Let's say their phone number with the Apple key server, and the Apple key server says, here are the public keys for their devices. Each device has its own public key pair. And then to send a text message to them, I encrypt with a secret key, and I encrypt that symmetric key with all the public keys of all their devices. Okay? And then I like sign the message with my own private key. So this ensures that the messages are encrypted end to end. Even Apple can't like decrypt these iMessages that are sent. But this key server has to be trusted to maintain the mapping, the keep track of everybody's public keys. Yep. The private key is stored on my device. Each device has its own private public key pair. So I have a laptop and I have a phone. They each have their own key pair. And maybe they're both associated with the same Apple ID. So on this key server, there'll be two public keys there, one for my laptop, one for my phone. There is no sync. Yep. When I add a new device, add a new public key pair, private key pair, I think. So for instance, one potential vulnerability of this is if someone has hacked into Apple's systems and they want to spy on me, they could add another public key to the list of public keys, put their own public key associated with my identity, so that when people send messages to me encrypted under my public key, it's also encrypted under the hacker's public key, and then the hacker can decrypt those messages. So that key server then is very security critical. And basically, that's not a problem that anyone's figured out how to solve with cryptography. The mitigation that Apple has for this is they've coded their key server. They tried to be super careful to make sure it has no security bugs in that code. So no one can hack into it, hopefully. And they've coded it so that anytime a new public key is registered with my Apple ID, a notification gets sent to all my devices saying another device was added to your account. If this doesn't sound right, click here or something. So at least if someone's trying to like spy on me in that way, that I get a notification. That make sense? So kind of a clever design. And I think comparable to what we see in other messaging systems or messaging systems moving towards some design similar to this. It's not Apple specific. Another aspect of phone security that I think is really interesting, moving away from the cryptography, is the security model, the operating system. The security model for most of our computers, laptops, desktops, servers, has historically come out of mainframes, the mainframe world, time-sharing machines in the 60s and 70s. And at that time, there would be like one computer for all of Berkeley, and everybody who wanted to do computing would have an account on that computer and could like, I don't know, run code on that computer. And each person has their own account, kind of like the Hive machines, except imagine there's only one Hive machine for everybody. So the operating systems at the time were designed that the major threat was that some other person with an account on that same machine was going to like somehow gain access to my data. And so the whole security model is designed to deal with that threat. So the security model in these operating systems is designed around the notion of user accounts. The user is the primary security like principle or identity. And every program that's running is associated with a user, and every file is associated with a user. And like, in particular, all my files get marked with my user ID. All the programs I'm running get marked with my user ID. Every program I run gets access to all my files. But other people can't access my files because they have a different user ID. So designed around this like time-sharing model of security. And like Unix was designed around that, and then Unix is the basic operating system used on every server. It's the like foundation behind the Mac. Windows also designed around a very similar model. And it's basically irrelevant today because no one else uses my laptop. I'm the only person who uses it. No one else uses my desktop. I'm the only person who uses it. Yeah, okay. The Hive machines get used by multiple people, so I guess that it's still relevant there. But for most part, the biggest security threat that I face on my laptop is not some other user who has a login and an account on that device, but that I go to a malicious website that sends me malware or sends me malicious stuff that exploits some vulnerability in some code, or that I install a program that's malicious. That's the biggest threat. And so when phones came out, Google Android made a new operating system. And then Apple made a new operating system. And it was an opportunity to have a new security model that was tailored for the threats that we face today rather than the 1970s. And so they have a new security model where rather than oriented around users, they're oriented around apps. And the idea is that one of the biggest threats is that I want to be able to install apps from the App Store from companies that maybe I've never heard of. And I want that to be safe. So each app runs in its own sandbox. It has its access to its own region of the file system and its own data and its own files, and has its own permissions for what like sensors it can access. And the one app can't access the data of another app unless they've done something to explicitly share, which is fundamentally different from like the Unix operating system where all the applications I run have access to all my files. Every app has access to all the data of all the other applications that I'm running. So I think this is really interesting because it makes it safe for people to install apps from the App Store, even if it's from some indie solo developer that you've never heard of and you don't trust. Better aligned with the security threats that we face today. So for instance, on Windows, we have a problem with malware, with viruses. And part of the problem is that if you install malicious code, it gets access to all your data. But on the phone, if I install a malicious app, it gets access to its own data, but not the data of any other apps. So the impact is much less. And there are permissions that govern what that each app has access to. Can it get access to my camera? Can it gain access to location? But that's under user control. So there's an opportunity to mitigate malicious code. So like malware and viruses are much less of a problem on modern phones than they are on desktops and laptops. Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
Because it does like very much limit what an app.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. There's some, cost functionality wise. Yeah. Yeah. I just think it's interesting though. I think it's really interesting. It's been very successful at improving security. Uh, yeah, though it does have some consequences. Like okay, I'll give you an example of something that is easy to implement on a desktop or a laptop that is harder to implement within the sandbox app ecosystem. A screen reader. If I have poor vision on my laptop, I can install a screen reader. That's some software that gains access to every window I open and reads it out loud, like if I'm blind. Because every program I run has access to all the data of every application I run. It has access needed to go monitor all the other programs I'm running and tamper with their memory and read their files and so on. In a phone, I can't easily install an application that has screen reader functionality because it'll be sandboxed. It won't be able to access the memory or the data of other applications I'm running. So to support screen reader, the operating system has to have some built-in support for that. So there is some loss in flexibility as a result of that. Yeah. But at the time phones came out, we had this, it's problem is largely receded, but at the time phones came out, we had this problem where it was really common for people to end up with viruses or malware or ransomware. I think it was something like 20 or 30% of Windows users had a problem with their machine getting compromised by malware. So the phone folks were like, no, we can't have that on phones. I think they were very successful. Another thing that I think is interesting to look at phones is how they're defending against software security exploits, like we saw in the first module in this class, and also jailbreaks. So software security exploits can be used to hack people's phones, can also be used to jailbreak your own phone. For instance, if I don't like the restrictions that Apple puts on me and I want to be able to, I don't know, run some app that's not available through the App Store or bypass some other restriction, I could try to jailbreak my phone. The way those jailbreaks work is by hacking my own phone, finding some code in there that has a buffer overrun vulnerability that lets me inject shell code, that lets me run my own code, that I can then patch the operating system and run anything I want. Well, phone manufacturers have put in place a whole bunch of mitigations against these kinds of vulnerabilities and been very successful. I think Apple's been particularly successful to a point where a couple of years ago, one company that buys exploits said, we'll pay between $5 to $7 million if you have if you find a vulnerability and you turn it into a fully working exploit that can be used to hack someone's iPhone stealthily. So that is kind of a measure of effectiveness of the security mechanisms that that it's hard enough to find working exploits that someone's willing to pay $5 million for it. And to give you an example of what these kind of exploits are used by, today it's kind of typically the exploits are not found by average everyday cyber criminals because it's too hard for them. The security measures on the iPhone are good enough that usually, most of the time, the vulnerabilities are found and exploited by companies doing it for pay. And they're often working for governments that are paying to be able to hack people's phones. So in 2021, details about this one company, NSO, was revealed. They have a spyware system called Pegasus that could be used to hack people's phones, and they were selling this as a service to other governments. And the targeting list of people whose phones had been targeted with this hacking system leaked to journalists, and they found on there a list of like 50,000 phone numbers, and then journalists went to figure out who was it who was getting attacked, and they found that it was being used to attack journalists, opposition politicians in some countries, human rights activists, stuff that. So very dual use kind of technology here. Presumably plausible, also used by law enforcement to go after criminals, drug cartels, other stuff like that too. And how does this spyware work? They hired really smart security people to go find vulnerabilities in like Safari web browser, iMessage, and the kernel. And then they typically be memory safety, buffer overrun, use after free vulnerabilities. They would exploit these vulnerabilities. And a typical exploit would typically they had to exploit multiple vulnerabilities. They would like find some vulnerability in Safari that allows a web page to like inject malicious code into the Safari browser, but the Safari browser was sandboxed and didn't have access to other apps. So then they would find some vulnerability in the kernel to be able to gain control of the operating system. But then the kernel used ASLR, so they would have to find another vulnerability. There was an information disclosure to like reveal the de-randomize where the pointers were in the kernel. So they would be like chaining together exploits for multiple vulnerabilities into this chain that could then take control of someone's iPhone, usually by like sending them a link in a text message, or maybe some of these exploits work. Just send someone an iMessage with like an image, and that would exploit a vulnerability in their JPEG parser or something. So obviously, the phone vendors would like to get rid of these software security vulnerabilities. And so I thought I'd show you some of the defenses they put in place. Android reported, I guess this is now 7 years ago, a breakdown of all the vulnerabilities that they had seen that year. And what I thought was interesting about this chart is that 90% of them are memory safety. The blue, the big one, is out of bounds write. The red is out of bounds read, also memory safety. Then the yellow, the next biggest, is use after free. Then green, the next one is integer overflow, which was like integer overflow followed by buffer out of bounds. So all of those 4 biggest categories are all memory safety flaws. Yeah.
But sharing a lot as the memory state, like we just like or sharing in place, you know,
I think it'll change. Yeah, I think it'll change. I think we'll see less of this, partially from memory safe code and also partially from some of the mitigations that are starting to be deployed. This was basically like a motivator. It was a motivator for Google, who were like, oh my gosh, we need to work on solving the memory safety problem. And for Apple, yeah.
Like, how is memory safety vulnerability is going to look like? Is it less than?
Yeah, everyone's waiting to see whether AI is going to like help security or hurt security. um, you could imagine that it might hurt security because if people use AI to write code, then AI is like learning from whatever, you know, snippet is in Stack Overflow that has security, the same security vulnerabilities that humans make. And so it'll be full of security vulnerabilities. You could hope that it would help security because maybe we just have to teach the models to write code securely once, and then all the code they write will be secure. You could worry that it might hurt security because there's starting to be some research showing that AI can find vulnerabilities more effectively than any other technique. And so it's like maybe easier for hackers to find vulnerabilities. You could imagine it might help security because the good guys could use those techniques and then use AI to like automatically fix their code. So I don't really know which way it's going to land. Yeah. Oh, OOB stands for out of bounds. Yeah. So buffer overrun kind of thing. Yeah. All right. So motivated by this, the iPhone has a bunch of mitigations. Maybe more than almost any other system that I know of. A bunch of mitigations against memory safety to make it harder to exploit memory safety bugs. So that if a code does have a bug, that hopefully it'd be hard for an attacker to exploit it. And first of all, they use ASLR and DEP, which we talked about in this class among the mitigations. That's very widespread among the computing industry. iPhone uses a pointer authentication code also, which is a hardware feature. They have use some hardware features where the CPU has extra features to enable some extra defenses against exploitation of memory safety. So in pointer authentication codes, on 64-bit systems, the pointer is 64 bits, but you don't actually need all 64 bits. You don't have that much memory. You only need like, I don't know, 40 bits because you have only 2 to the 40 bytes of memory. So the high 20, 24 bits of a pointer are like always all zero. They're unused. And so pointer authentication code says, let's use those bits for something, for security. And so it stores in there a message authentication code that's computed over the pointer value and also the address where the pointer is stored. And so if an attacker changes that pointer value, they won't know the key to compute a valid MAC tag. So they won't be able to replace a pointer value with some other pointer value. And they also can't copy a pointer from stored in one place in memory to another place because the MAC tag also won't be valid because the MAC tag depends both on the value of the pointer but also the address where it's stored at. So this makes it harder to defeat, to like exploit, I don't know, overwriting return addresses, doing return-oriented programming, overwriting function pointers. A lot of the techniques we saw for exploiting memory safety get harder with pointer authentication code. Of course, it is a slowdown to compute this message authentication code every time a pointer is created and check it every time a pointer is used. But that's done in hardware so that it'll be pretty fast. So the CPU has some extra circuitry designed to compute this MAC tag and check that it's valid. And then most recently, the iPhone, because Apple makes their own processors, they can put hardware support for security in them. And Apple processors and ARM processors have support for a new mitigation that I just learned about today. I was reading about today for the first time. Thank you, Annabella, for showing me about this. Memory tagging extension, which is cool. Every region of memory gets assigned a tag. It's like a 4-bit value. And every pointer has a tag. It's like 4 bits stored in those unused bits of the pointer. And the processor, anytime you try to read or write memory, it looks at the tag in the pointer, in the address, and the tag for the memory region and makes sure that they match. And if they don't match, then it disallows reading or writing. So when your program calls malloc to allocate some region of memory, it assigns a tag to that region of memory. Stuff before it or after it will have a different tag. And then the pointer that points into that malloc region gets the correct tag. Well, if there's some buffer overrun in the code that the attacker exploits to cause that pointer to walk past the end of the allocated memory and start pointing into some other region of memory, the pointer will have the original tag, but it'll be pointing to a region of memory that has a different tag. And so the CPU will block reads or writes with that pointer because the tags won't match. So it's an extra mitigation that makes it harder to exploit memory safety bugs. And doing all these extra checks in software would be slow, but they add circuitry to the hardware processor to do all these checks in parallel so it doesn't slow anything down.
Like, it seems like in your average
Yeah.
processor, you have a lot of say,
Yeah. Yeah.
large.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a probabilistic defense. It's not perfect. Ideally, you would like to have a different tag for every memory region. You have a lot of memory regions, millions or billions of them. So you'd need many bits, 20 or 30 bits for the tag. But they don't actually do that. They use a 4-bit tag. So tags are reused. Each memory region assigns a random 4-bit tag, which is not perfect, but what it means is that if there's a buffer overrun and your pointer is pointing out of bounds, it'll point to some other memory region, and there's a 1 in 16 chance that the other memory region just happens to have the same 4-bit tag, but like 15 out of 16 times it won't. So if you try to exploit a vulnerability, 15 out of 16 times it'll fail. Or if your exploit needs to write to 2 regions, memory regions, maybe it's 255 out of 256 times it'll fail. So it'll probably be a lot of failures. It'll probably cause a lot of crashes before success. And if you can monitor, and if a program is repeatedly crashing, then you're under attack and do something. It's not perfect, but it makes it a lot harder or less likely to be able to successfully exploit one of these vulnerabilities. And another defense that's put in place against software security vulnerabilities and memory safety vulnerabilities is sort of inspired by this chart, also from Android 7 years ago, where they report all the vulnerabilities they found, what component of the system it was in. And what I found interesting from this was the biggest 2 components make up more than half of all the vulnerabilities. Those are media and Bluetooth. So basically components that are interacting with data from the outside world. And so what iPhone does and what Android does is they sandbox a bunch of code. For instance, the JPEG codec that parses a JPEG image and decompresses that and turns that into something to display on the screen, pixels to display on the screen. That is code that does a computation to do the decompression. It has had security buffer overrun vulnerabilities in it. It's written in C, so it's fast. It doesn't really need ability to do anything other than computation. It doesn't need to be able to read or write files or open network connections. If it has a buffer overrun vulnerability, though, an attacker could introduce shellcode that could do all of those things. So the idea of sandboxing is put that computation, the JPEG parsing decompression, into a separate component, like a separate process that's running with no permissions, no permission to read or write the file system, no permission to open any network connections, no permission to do anything, basically, except just output data, output the decoded pixels. And that way, even if there is a vulnerability in that code and someone injects malicious shellcode into it, all that malicious shellcode could do is output wrong pixels, but can't go trashing your data or stealing a copy of your credit card number or anything like that. So the iPhone and many other systems will sandbox a bunch of software components that don't need privilege and that are complicated, hairy code that might have vulnerabilities. So your web browser, large parts of your web browser that deal with handling HTML and formatting the web page and rendering it to the screen and then running the JavaScript, all that runs in a sandbox that doesn't have access to the file system or the network. And then the part of the web browser that does go fetch the page from the web server, that needs network access. So that can't be run in the sandbox, but much of your web browser runs in a sandbox. So this is a mitigation against vulnerabilities that reduces the impact of vulnerabilities in the sandbox code. How are we doing so far? Are we tired? Are we exhausted? I had one more thing I was going to show you. Should we take a break and then I'll show it to you and then we'll wrap up? Okay, let's take like a 3 or 4 minute break. Wander around, breath of fresh air. All right, while you're grabbing some to take home to your friends, let me tell you about the last topic I wanted to show you. Um, no, there's more left. Take it from me, please. Someone has to take that from me. Okay, so private cloud compute. Um, I wanted to show you about kind of a new trend that's happening in the security world about how to use cloud compute securely. And Apple's one of the innovators, but there are other companies as well that are innovating in this area, sometimes called confidential computing. And in the context of the phone, the motivation is this. There's some computation tasks, they're just too much for the wimpy processor on my phone. It's amazing how much computing power my phone has, but still it's less than a server. And it's running on a battery rather than connected to mains power. So there's some computation that is just beyond the capability of the chip on my phone or would drain my battery too much. And the only alternative for how to do that computation is to offload that and do that computation on some server. one of Apple's cloud servers. So an example is speech to text is one functionality that is done on many systems on cloud servers because it requires sophisticated AI models, and the end user devices just aren't fast enough to do that in real time. And another example is other kinds of AI inference really benefit from graphics cards. And my phone doesn't have a graphics card on it, but like a server can do, much more, much higher throughput inference. Like for instance, ChatGPT. I can't run ChatGPT model on my local phone, and it really benefits from batching many people's queries and doing them in parallel. So there's some tasks that we'd really like. Well, we'd like to do them on our phone if we could, because the security benefits of doing it on my phone means that I don't have to worry about anyone else gaining access to that data, but we can't do it on my phone. I have to do it on the cloud. And when I do the computation on the cloud, that means I have to send some of my sensitive data up to the cloud, and then it gets handled by this cloud server that I'm not sure if I can trust. It's a new opportunity for something to get hacked. Also, it means that some of my data is now being handled and is visible to Apple or Google or Amazon or whatever the company is. And if it's like if it's like speech to text, maybe I don't want audio from the microphone being piped up to Google or Apple or Amazon all the time. For instance, Amazon got in trouble because some of their employees were listening to some of the recordings from the Alexa for quality control purposes, and well, for whatever purpose. And some of those could potentially be pretty private stuff that gets picked up. Even if I'm not deliberately talking to Siri or Alexa, sometimes it just gets confused and thinks I'm talking to it, records audio, sends it to the cloud to do speech to text, and then realizes, oh, that wasn't for me, but the data's already been uploaded. Okay. What's that? Can't they delete the data? They could delete the data. That was another thing Amazon got in trouble for, was they didn't delete the data. They could have, but they didn't. Yeah. So Apple has a recent new solution to this, what they called private cloud compute, where they're going to run these tasks on Apple's cloud servers, but they want to provide people assurances that their data is safe. So one of the things they're going to do for sure is delete the data. But they want you to know, they want you to have more confidence than that. Like anyone could claim they're deleting the data, but then actually not delete the data. So how do we know whether we can trust it? Okay, so they want to provide a way to do some of this computation on their cloud, but like make it as secure as if it had happened only on my phone. So in particular, Apple and Apple employees there should be no way that they can gain access to the data that I'm uploading to the cloud to do this compute. Even if Apple's hacked, the hackers shouldn't gain access to my data. If some government somewhere that I've never heard of demands Apple provide them access, Apple wants to be able to say, I can't, sorry. So how do they do that? It's some pretty sophisticated stuff happening here. They have trusted hardware. They design their own processors so they can put special hardware support in their processor for security. And in their cloud data centers, they've got trusted hardware. Intel also provides support for this as well. Many of the major processor vendors are starting to include hardware support, where what trusted hardware does is it provides a way to run a program and make sure that the data never leaves that server. So for instance, the CPU has circuitry in there to encrypt everything. Every time that the CPU reads or writes from memory, it encrypts the data that it is storing to memory before writing it to memory. And then when reading from RAM, it's reading back some encrypted stuff and it decrypts it before using it, built into the CPU. And also built into this hardware is that it will only load an operating system that is authorized by Apple. So how do we indicate, how do we tell what operating systems are authorized by Apple? Systems are signed by some private key. There's a public-private key pair. The public key is like hard-coded or loaded into this hardware somehow. In the hardware, when it boots up, before it loads an operating system, it'll check to make sure that the operating system is signed using the corresponding private key. And if it's not, it won't load it. Okay, so this makes sure that this can only run trusted software that Apple has designated, only trusted operating systems that Apple has designated as like safe. And then that operating system is responsible for loading and running applications. The operating system has its own code to make sure that the operating system will only load and run applications that are themselves signed as well. So when the operating system, before it starts a program, it like checks the signature on the program to make sure that it's an authorized, signed, Apple claims as safe application. So that only Apple authorized applications can run on this cloud server. And then Apple builds some special operating systems and applications just for these purposes, just for this private cloud compute, just for like speech to text, voice recognition, or just for AI inference. And they release the source code and the compiled binaries for all of these publicly, so anyone can look at them and like confirm that these are designed to like protect your data, not allow anyone else access to your data. They'll like receive the data from your device and then do the computation and return the result back to you, but they won't send the result to anyone else. They're written to delete the data after they're done, not keep any copies, not send anyone else a copy. So you can inspect the source code if you want to try to verify that Apple has done that diligently. The options are written to be stateless, so that when it does some computation for you, your phone sends some data to do some computation, the server does the computation, sends back the results, and then it like forgets everything, deletes everything, deletes all the data, doesn't retain anything. So that we don't have to worry about stored data stored on the cloud servers getting leaked. Yeah.
Wait, sounds like why would they release all of the authorized experiments? Is it so like third-party applications can run apps which leverage Apple's cloud compute? That seems like Apple would have that.
No, they're not trying to allow third parties to use the cloud compute. I think right now they only support their own applications. But the goal is to allow, it's not just their claim, not just them saying we claim that we're protecting your data, but provide a way so that interesting people, if they really care, can go do a cross-check of Apple's claims.
They are only releasing binaries for the previous OS versions. If there's a hard public key there, I guess that's just public.
Yeah, it's only the public keys are hard-coded in there. Yeah. So they're releasing the binaries and the source code. You can look at the source code. Apparently, I haven't tried. Yeah. How do we know they're actually using that? Hopefully, I don't know. I haven't tried. Hopefully, they have compiled this in a way that the compiled binary is a deterministic function of the source code, so you could rerun the build script on your own end and verify you get the same binaries.
Million or whatever.
They have monetary incentives, like a bug bounty. If you find some problem with their design or their implementation, they'll give you money. So that's another way that we can like gain some trust that they've done it safely. That if there is some problem in their design, then presumably someone would try to claim the bounty and get, there's some monetary incentive for people to go look for problems. So from the fact that no one has been awarded a bounty, but there's up to $1 million available, maybe I can conclude, oh, that gives me some increased trust.
I feel like they didn't like AI stuff. So,
Yeah, I think this is, I don't really know a lot about the details, but I think it's designed only for some special purpose computations. Like, here's a recording of audio, convert that into text form, recognize this, the speech, do speech to text and return back to me the text. So that's the input is the audio, the output is the like the textual representation. That's when it's like a self-contained task. Or here's some AI inference. Here's an image, return to me its classification, something like that. It's not tasks that require context or like some ongoing thing, but it's like a self-contained small computation. Yeah. Uh-huh.
They're actually a different application, but they sign the like at the back door, like maybe government tells them, don't actually use the one you released, use like this one, which I was back.
Yeah. Or what if some hacker hacks into their system somehow and like makes a modified version of the application that has a backdoor and is sending a copy of all the data to the hacker, and then the hacker arranged to load on the cloud servers that backdoored application, get it signed and loaded on there so that what's actually running is this backdoored application, not the intended one. Yeah, absolutely. So they've got to defend against that for this to be a meaningful protection, right? Yeah. So the first defense they have is that control over the signing key, that they say like, hey, we're going to try to be really careful to make sure about what we sign. But that's not perfect. And the second defense is something I was going to show you in the next slide. So there is a transparency mechanism that is designed to make sure that there is a publicly available list of all code that is ever run or could be run on these cloud servers. So let me come back to that and tell you about how the transparency log works. But if the attacker wanted to do that, they would then have to put their backdoored version on this transparency log that'd be visible to everyone. And then everyone could see, oh, there's some binary that doesn't correspond to any of the source code copies that Apple released. Or alternatively, if it does, then the source code, there's the source code, and that source code has a backdoor. There's a possibility to detect that. Yeah. So the goal they're going for is that no one, not even themselves, can access the data and the trusted hardware. That's really challenging because they're providing the code, right? So they have to defend against themselves writing malicious code. It takes quite a lot of contortions to like prove that they're not like deliberately screwing you over. Yeah, so maybe I'll tell you about how this transparency log works. Oh, before I do, there's another mechanism I wanted to tell you about. Another mechanism, another defense in there is attestation. Built into this trusted hardware is when it loads an operating system, the CPU keeps a record of what operating system was loaded, like computes a SHA-256 hash of the operating system that was loaded, and like keeps that in memory, and has the ability to send a signed statement to the client, to the phone that it's interacting with from the cloud CPU. The cloud CPU says, I'm running the following operating system, and provides a hash of the operating system that's run, and signed by a private key that is specific to that cloud server. And these public-private key pairs are like loaded onto the cloud server when it's manufactured. Each cloud server has its own private key. So anyone can, like anyone's phone can verify that this is a valid Apple cloud server because it has a public key with a certificate from Apple, and that it's running an authorized operating system because the CPU generated a signed statement, promised, this is the operating system that I loaded. And also the operating system will sign a statement about what application it is running, so you can figure out like the hash of the application that's running. So the client can actually verify what operating system and what application is running on the cloud server that it's talking to. And there's hardware support in there for that to be secure, so that even if the operating system or the application is malicious, it can't like overwrite that or generate false statements. So this is an extra defense that the client for one of these attestations and checks it against the authorized list and makes sure that it's interacting with the cloud server that's running one of these authorized operating system and application versions. So if a hacker breaks into the cloud and like tries to modify the operating system or the application and somehow bypasses these signature checks, still the client can detect that. Because assuming the chip, someone who hacks in probably is not going to be able to like physically modify that chip and the gates on that chip. And then the third piece is this transparency log that I mentioned earlier. There's a transparency log, a public transparency log. This is published to the world of all the operating systems and applications that it has authorized. And the trusted hardware, the CPU and the cloud server, when it loads the operating system or the application, it checks to make sure that that operating system or application is on this list, this transparency log. I call it a log. It's a append only. It's like a linked list. It's an append only data structure that's published somewhere, like on some website, and that over time more versions might get added. Like a new application might get authorized by Apple and added to this list, or there might be an update to the operating system, and so a new version of the operating system gets added to this list. So you want ability to add to this list, but not delete. Once something's added, it's on there forever. So the way that Apple does that is with chaining. And the way you can think of this is like, let's suppose there's 4 applications that are authorized, A1 to A4. It like signs A1, and then it takes that digital signature and it concatenates that with A2, and then it signs that. And it concatenates that with A3 and signs that, and concatenates that with A4 and signs that. So you get the signature that can be verified, and it can be verified that it sort of like has authorized all of A1, A2, A3, and A4. So if I have this signature on this built up in this long, complicated way, you can then prove to me that A2 is on the list. You could prove to me that A4 is on the list. If I had this signature, how would you prove to me that A4 is on the list? Yeah? Yeah, except I'm not going to sign, I better do verify, because to verify, only the signer has the private key. Other people, if I want to verify, I do verification. So what I would actually do is I would verify that this tag, this digital signature, is a valid signature on something followed by A4. And that proves that A4 is on the list. And if I wanted to prove that A3 was on the list, I would take that something and verify that that something is a signature on something else followed by A3, and now I would know that A3 is on the list. Did I lose you? Let's let S1 be a signature on A1, and S2 be a signature on the concatenation of S1 and A2. If I give you S2, you can verify that A2 is on the list by verifying that S2 is a signature on S1 followed by A2. If you wanted to verify that A1 was on the list, you would verify that and then also verify that S1 is a signature on A1.
But like say they publish the ledger.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have access to, I guess we do have access to all the past signatures too, so it just from like the previous versions of the ledger.
Yeah, the prover, the person revealing the signature, the revealing this transparency log, maybe they reveal all these intermediate signatures too to enable verification. Yeah. Yeah. I realize this is kind of mind-bending. And what's interesting about this is that the signer, Apple, can add a new one to the list by taking that signature on that big complicated thing, appending A5 to it and signing it and releasing that. And that now gives you it creates a new log that has all the previous entries and also has A5 on it. Use the same signature key for all signatures, yes. This is Apple's signing key. So Apple can append to this list, but no one else can. What's the point of being append only? It's because of transparency. Suppose that we want to preserve history. Suppose that Apple releases a new application or a new OS version. The way they do that is they append that to this list. They publish the new list. Now all the cloud servers will accept that new version and can load that new version. Here's the fear. Here's the threat we're trying to defend against. What if some Apple employee goes rogue and is malicious, and they create a new backdoored version of an application? They add it to this list. Maybe they even publish the list. They load that onto the cloud CPU, and then they delete it from the list, and they go back to the old, and they publish a copy of this without the backdoored application. Then they would kind of like have almost removed the opportunity for people to detect this backdoored application, but still got the backdoored application running on the cloud servers. So we want it so that once something is added to this list, that it'll forever be on the list, to maximize the chances that if Apple does something malicious and tries to put a malicious application on the authorized list, that this will be detectable. This is sunlight is the best disinfectant. This is the back pressure against backdoored or malicious applications is that it will become known to everyone sooner or later. So there's a really strong incentive not to authorize those. Oof, yeah.
Where like each machine is sending like a signed, like a signature to their OS.
Yeah.
But if the machine is compromised, what is making them send a valid signature? Like, why are they not able to just like send a fake signature?
Ultimately, what prevents that is that the signing and stuff is done in the circuitry on this cloud CPU. And so assuming that the manufacturer did that circuitry correctly and hasn't put a backdoor in the circuitry, it can't be bypassed. Yeah, so it does require some trust in the manufacturer at the time they manufactured it. Yeah. But like a buffer overrun can't change that existing circuitry. Yeah. Okay, so this is fancy stuff. If it was kind of confusing, no worries, that's fine. It's like an advanced topic. This is the same notion, sometimes called digital timestamping in the cryptographic literature, or if you follow blockchain, this is hash chaining or the public ledger. It's like half or a third of the design of Bitcoin. Anyway, so like super sophisticated cryptography used to ensure that your data is safe with Apple on their cloud. I find it really fascinating. So like maybe just the takeaway is I wanted to show you all this stuff because I think it's really cool to see the stuff we learned in this class like applied in real systems. And phones are kind of an interesting application of the very latest, greatest like security techniques. So I'm sure we'll see these in other systems in the future. That's all I wanted to say about phone security. I thought I would leave a brief time if you want for a Ask Me Anything session. We've been so focused on like technical stuff in this class. If there's anything else that's on your mind or you'd like to talk about, I'm glad to be here for you. And if not, we'll call it a day. Yeah? Yeah, other courses. Sadly, we don't really have other security courses. It's like this is it, and then you're done. But if you like the cryptography part, there's two cryptography courses that are occasionally offered, rarely. One is in the CS department. It's what is it, 176? 171? 171. And then there's a math in the math department. There's a course on number theory and cryptography. Um, they're kind of only offered pretty rarely. There's another course that's been occasionally offered, I think through the law school by Professor Chris Hufnagel on cybersecurity and public policy. Focuses more on like policy and law side of things than on the technical side. That might be of interest. Um, and then beyond that, go learn other topics in computer science or check out YouTube talks, follow security blogs. We don't have much. Yeah. Any more stuff related to blockchain? Every so often, Don Song does a CS194 course on decentralized finance, blockchain, AI agents. So you might love that stuff if you like blockchain. Yeah. It's super fascinating. It's like, wow, some of the coolest, most advanced cryptography, and it's actually used in practice. Yeah, did you? What's up? Yep.
But I use the graph, as backslash the other third party. Don't know what's out there. Read those.
I'm so lame. I'm like, there's like the early adopters and then the average, and I'm like a super late adopter and everything. So I haven't tried a lot of the coolest, latest, greatest stuff. Sorry. Yeah. I don't have a Facebook and I'm like an old fart. Yeah.
Okay. What do you do to, like, share your own data?
What do I do with my own data? Yeah, I'm totally one of those. I don't do it. I used to be when I was young, I used to be like super, super privacy activist. Oh my gosh. I would like, I'm not gonna have a credit card because I'm not gonna let the man spy on me. Um, I'm gonna use cash for everything. And then I guess I just kind of ran out of steam and fire and like whatever convenience is really nice to have. So I guess I don't really stress out about things too much. I turn on automatic updates and I have backups and I use Apple and I uh, make my purchases with credit cards because I know I can get do a charge back if there's some fraud, and I mostly don't stress about it too much. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I'm taking more chances than I should, but yeah. My most favorite, I haven't talked about in this class, was working on electronic voting security. Um, I got a phone call from a Stanford professor who said, they're starting to use electronic voting machines in my county, and I don't know much about them, but I'm kind of worried. And I this I ran across this, I got a call from this old lady in Georgia who says she got the source code for one of these. And I think it might be interesting to look at them and see like how secure they are, but I don't know anything about security. Would you join me in doing this? And I said, nah, I'm sure they were really careful with it. So he's like, okay. And he calls up some other security people. And like a month later, I see they have a paper released. They dropped everything, looked at the source code that was indeed the real source code for the voting machine, and found it was like so bad. Oh my gosh. They had like hard-coded cryptographic keys, and the password was like, I don't know, Diebold 1 or something like this. And they used ECB mode encryption, and they had buffer overrun vulnerabilities in there. And if you put the flash card into it with the right file name, it would run the code on that when it booted up. And there was flaws in the smart code used to activate that would enable someone to vote multiple times, and you could have a virus that spread from machine to machine. And just a bad situation. So then ensued kind of maybe 5 or 10 years of like activism. Like I got like really upset at this. Like, what the heck? Why are we using this crummy stuff? And I think many other computer scientists got pretty upset too. And yeah, so that kind of led into some really interesting research trying to understand the security of voting machines that are used. And um, I did some project with the state of Florida to like want to look at software for a disputed election where um, people were claiming their votes were stolen. We finally decided I don't think it was hacking, that was bad user interface design. I did another project where the state of California, the Secretary of State said, we need to get to the bottom of this and figure out if California voting systems have a problem or not. Would you put together a team to go analyze the code, like independent people, because I'm not sure who to trust. Computer scientists were saying, this is so bad. You can't, what are you doing? And the vendors who made the software were saying, our stuff is great. What do you mean? That's nonsense. There's nothing wrong with it. Don't believe those computer scientists. They're making it up. So she said, we got to figure this out. We got to get to the bottom of this. And we put together a team of like 40 different people from the computer security community, and we spent all summer analyzing all the voting systems. We had all the source code. We had hands-on access to the voting machines to try to like steal votes and so on. And we ended up discovering that all of them had flaws like this. They were all vulnerable. But we're fortunate because in California we have a paper. Most people vote on paper. And so she basically decertified all the electronic systems, and it said you got to make sure there's a paper copy always, and you got to do an audit of the paper records to make sure, like a hand count of a statistical fraction of the paper records to cross-check. So I think we're in a lot better shape now. But that was pretty like inspiring and fun to be working on a real system. And as part of that process, I got to like go observe elections and meet election officials and like serve as a poll worker and learn how our elections work. And I find it super inspiring seeing how the system works. If you ever want to spend a day volunteering, I can highly recommend being a poll worker. It's like a really good experience. I came away feeling really good about like, so easy for me to be cynical about government, and I came away feeling really good about how we run elections and the way that like people come together out of civic spirit basically to make this thing work. So yeah, really positive. When was this? Um, this was like started around 2004, 2005, and it kind of launched after the 2000 election. Was a disputed election in Florida that was like super close, and it was uh, punching holes on punch card, and it had a lot of problems that election geeks knew about, but the rest of the world didn't know. And then it was so close, all those problems came to the forefront. And so after that, a lot of places started moving to electronic systems.
Think like computer security is ever going to get solved? Do you think it's just always something? Like at one point you could kind of just like steal people's calls and just do a fire scan. Now you can't do that. It's a lot harder to probably a lot of people are not doing.
I don't know what to expect. I think we're getting better in some ways, but on the other hand, the human element doesn't change. Human nature doesn't change, and there's been, scams and con men and scams and social engineering and all this kind of stuff for as long as there's been civilization. So I imagine there's gonna be security problems for our lifetime. Uh-huh. What are my thoughts on digital IDs? Digital IDs. Well, you can, I told you that when I was young, I was like a super privacy activist, so you can probably infer what I thought about them. I don't know. I mean, it's like that's like you, now it's just like my politics, and I don't. My politics have no greater value than anyone else's. I think I probably was not a very good candidate because I was one of those like, kind of like, I don't know, slightly anarchist, like anti-government activist types. I did get approached once, but I don't think that the conversation didn't last super long. So, what? Uh, I forget. It was some like national defense coordinating something or other. Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't have been my thing, right? I like getting to work with students and publishing and being part of the open community. And you go to work for the NSA, and obviously you can't do that. So yeah, yeah.
Is like the wiretapping thing, is that like something else?
What's the context?
Like, on an app, like you approve it on an app, it's more secure than like just.
Oh, two-factor authentication. Yeah, yeah. No, the reason why that's an improvement has nothing to do with wiretapping. The one of the main benefits of two-factor authentication is if your password is guessable, some random hacker somewhere on the other side of the world, if it's only your password that lets you in, could guess your password in. But with two-factor authentication, they won't be able to because they don't have access to your phone.
Like the fact that they use the app instead of just like sending like a one-time payment tax.
Ah, that has to do with the fact that the okay, yeah, sorry, we're now deep in some like deep technical thing. The telephony uh two-factor auth by sending you a text message with a code is not as secure because carrier, if someone calls up your cell phone carrier and like claims to be you and says they have a new phone, they may be able to like actually get access to your phone number. The protections against that are not super strong. It's been done before. Someone like basically steals your phone number by fooling the phone company into thinking they're you. Whereas with an app, that vulnerability vector isn't there anymore. Someone on Zoom asked, "What's the coolest moment I've had in my security career?" Oh, I don't know. So many. Yeah, this class, absolutely. Right here, you all. Probably maybe the first time that I ever like was playing around with as an undergraduate with the shared server, the Unix server, and I figured out how to get root access, and I got the prompt that had the root, the pound sign showing you're there as root. Very satisfying. Yeah. This kind of got me started. Like, oh, I successfully hacked a machine. So exciting.
Wait, so I guess this is kind of a semi type of question. On iPhone, like if all the apps are sandbox, why do they say that like there are levels to the data privacy that apps collect? There are apps that can track you across that.
Yeah, all the apps are sandboxed. And then every app has some permissions that it can do beyond the sandbox. Sandbox means the app starts with nothing, and the permissions grant it access to things. Like there is a permission that allows an app to access GPS and query your location. And there's another, I think, let's see. I don't know how all the permissions work, but I think there might be a global ID that an app can access that is like a unique ID for you. Uh, you're getting into the limits of my knowledge of iOS right now. I'm sorry. We'd have to go look it up together. Yeah. What's the coolest thing of What's the coolest thing I've hacked?
Not that, the other one. Like, it's dangerous one. Yeah, which I didn't have.
Strangely, I'm not going to admit to that on a recorded YouTube video. But I think the most fun that I had, I don't know if it counts as a hack, was what April Fool's that I did on my security class during COVID, where it was all on Zoom. Everything was on Zoom. 261. And so it's, all on Zoom and screen shared, and I was screen sharing. And then I arranged so that at one point I started to have some notifications appear of like emails in my inbox where it, shows you the subject line and the first line. And I arranged to have some fake messages show up that were like, you know, confidential from the dean and like from the department chair, letting us know that like Stanford was buying out the CS department and then a follow-up message, but don't tell anyone, it's not going to be announced till tomorrow. And then I was like furiously trying to click and close messages. I think that's probably the most fun that I had. I think at least some of them did. Well, eventually I did. Uh-huh. I don't think I've done anything really terribly illegal, actually. I did at one point experiment with running the like wiretap on Berkeley networks just to see what I could see. And then had to get a very kind and gentle reminder from our system administrator that that was probably not okay and that I really shouldn't do that again. Yeah, oops. It turns out they had a way to tell. PhD student, yeah. Yeah. My poor advisor had to come have a talk with me. It was like I was not sure who was more embarrassed, him or me. Please no more. Yeah.
Is this like at a fundamental level, or is this like an app version, like this, or like this one's implementation of 2FA is bad? And is like just the general concept of like having an app that the two-factor authentication like secure.
I think the app-based ones are pretty good. It's usually the SMS ones that have some fundamental problem. Yeah. You get some like man in the middle phishing kind of stuff where um, there's like social engineering to convince the user to enter in the code that they got sent into the attacker's phishing email web page, and then that lets the attacker gain access to the account. Yeah.
But why is the app-based authentication, the ones I know about like Google Auth, like Microsoft Auth, since you're often like putting trust in the middle, just by doing that, right? Like, is it just generally thought that the risk of having that point is just less than getting text message and phishing get checked from that?
The risk of a backdoor, you said?
But well, you're hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I think empirically, the risk that Google misuses that access seems to be a lot lower than that one of the cell phone carriers' customer service representatives gets tricked into um, changing some detail on your account. Yeah, just kind of empirically. All right, let me take one last one and then I'll let everyone go and I'll stick around if anybody else has more things they want to talk about. Talked about what my current research is on. Yeah, my students are doing some really cool stuff. It's all around AI. So around partially around attacks on AI. So like ways to attack AI agents or how to protect them against attack, jailbreaks and prompt injection, which I think I mentioned in class. And then also some really nifty stuff on using AI to make traditional cybersecurity tasks make the task of defenders easier to like automate some of the tedious aspects of protecting systems, like automate looking through source code for vulnerabilities and fixing them, or automate fuzzing related tasks, or automate monitoring log files for evidence of intrusion. It's really fun. I love it. I love getting to learn new stuff every day. One's enough at it. One at a time is enough for me. All right, I think I'm going to stop it there, but I'll stick around if people want to talk more. I really appreciate you doing this class with me this semester. It's such a joy for me. I get to share with you my love of this subject. It's wonderful to get to do this experience with you. So thank you all. You're going to go do amazing things in your life. I hope you make the world a better place. Have a great rest of your semester.